Hi. I reread your message and I was just like, oh yeah, that question that I asked in response was really confusing. I apologize. So this is how I would start, but think of me as somebody that can keep on chewing on ideas with you. Because we're good. We always, with every problem, start really ambiguously and as broad a scope as we can. That way, when we choose to narrow down, we're in control of that process. So here's how I would approach it. By the way, I have um, excuse me, I wrote down some of the keywords. And when you have keywords that work really well, you can write them on the side. So for example, you were talking about treatment length. That might, and you use the word long term. I don't know if hyphens work, but if you have more than one word, you put it in quotes like that, so that the keywords stick together. But they also look at that as longitudinal, um, and you might do lifetime. I'm not sure about that one, but you can think of synonyms for that. So for substance use disorder, let's see if there's any synonyms for that. So I'm going to grab this, and that'll be our first keyword. I'm going to show you a guide that has all of these recommended things at the end of the video, but I always start in the catalog because it's multidisciplinary, and we can just cast a broad net and see like, well, what's going on where. So I got to put substance use disorder. First of all, I want to see if this is the convention for diagnosis. And so, yes, there's quite a lot. You could go down into subject and see more, but I think for this one, it's going to be just like major areas. Oh, substance abuse. Is it just going to be that? Or is it going to be the specific disorder? Is it classified as specifically that? I'm guessing it is. To narrow it down further, excuse me, I've got, maybe there's stuff growing. If you look just in the title, that will mean that substance use disorder is not showing up necessarily as a lower priority thing, but it's like one of the most important things, so it had to be in the title. So we can narrow down that way. So that brought us down by like 75%. And so it has to be in the title. So it's the most important thing. And you can go into peer-reviewed journals too, um, and narrow it down even further. And here's all sorts of different ideas that you can work with. And so 7,342, that's a huge body that we can narrow down further. So let's go in, long-term, longitudinal. Let's try looking for that. Long-term, oh, I did this search already. So if I want to, in an individual line, I can put in synonyms or related terms, or if I'm looking for a concept, but it might be called different things. And you just separate those with an or. I don't know why it's blue. Isn't that cool? I hope I didn't break the catalog. So now, out of those 7,000 articles that have substance use disorder in the title, we're also looking for things that have long-term or lifetime or longitudinal in abstract keywords or the title as well. And we could narrow down to just title, but you see how I'm like starting out big and then moving further in. And now we go down by another big percent. But this is good because we have like, they talk about the population we're working with and all sorts of different things. And this is where we can start to narrow down even further. Let's add another line. And this is the question that I had. We were talking about the word client. And I realized, I think the question I was interested in is it client or counseling or intervention or even treatment? So like the persona of somebody as a client, I got my tongue tied around that one. So I was looking for, well, how does somebody become a client? And so this is where it could be court-ordered intervention, or it could be somebody seeking it on their own. And then all of that doesn't matter. And we can just look at like that it's specifically a treatment that somebody has sought, and how they became a client is less relevant. So we had 1,000. Hey, now we're down to 963. If we go back to what we were looking at, You wanted to do length of treatment. So when they're looking at longitudinal, I mean, this and long term, this is where you'll have to glean, and you'll have to read through titles um, and see if you can find these other ones. You can also add a keyword and do them systematically one at a time. So let's add a new line, and employment, and you could systematically search for it that way. But that might be more frustrating than going through all of them and just looking for those chocolate chips. But you can approach it those two ways. Let me show you. By the way, if you find something that's just like, oh, this is the perfect article, look at the keywords that they use, look at the rhetoric and the language and vocabulary, and you might want to change some of the keywords that you have here, or add another or take something away. So write down your keywords in like note-taking software or on a pad of paper. But let me show you some resources. Once you're feeling better about your resources or your keywords, we can go into specific databases. PsycInfo is huge. For social work, that's like the bee's knees for everything. But let me show you some other ones. If you go to research guides and look for social work, I have a guide of my favorites that you might go through. So research, I want to do PhD and master's help, but if you just click on social work, they all have tabs. And there's PhD and master's help. The first thing that we just did is validating. So this is systematic. It's Dale's recipe for baking a review, a lit review. The first one is validating keywords. We did that in the library catalog. But if you're looking at public policy, CQ Researcher and Magazine are related to Congress and legislatures all over. Nexus Uni and US Newsstream are newspapers where people are debating the efficacy of something. So for example, homelessness and mental illness, people are looking at evidence that, well, if you close all the mental health clinics that are for free, then there is a greater susceptibility of a huge population becoming homeless. So that's an argument locally if you wanted to look at local areas. Having said that, Google's really great for stuff like that too. If you want to look for intervention or long-term, this is how you would do that. Or if you're looking for a recipe for pizza dough, I don't know why I put that in there. The next step is the databases, where you're digging into specific disciplines. These are my favorites. This like keeps on going, like something's happening. PsycInfo, huge with social work, but sociological abstracts is fantastic because it's looking at societies, and there's like government policy, funding, maybe there's grants, maybe there's research of a particular state or city. And then all these other ones are really great too. There's public policy. CINAHL and Medline are where people are doing interventions on behalf of somebody with like a physical manifestation. Maybe they have emphysema, and they're looking at other interventions. So these are my favorites. So let me show you sociological abstracts, but we're just going to cut and paste in the advanced search. Zotero. So let's do this in the title. There we go, document title. And then long-term or lifetime or longitudinal. We can add a row. And let's do client or counseling or intervention or treatment. Again, this is looking at all of society. So this might be group psychology, or it might be policy, or it might be just a study that's going on. So think of the context that you're interested in. I hesitate. And you can also, look at that, you can narrow down by peer-reviewed and all dates. Let's do last 3 years. During the pandemic, a lot of people did systematic reviews. Oh, look at that. It narrowed it down to just 10. So if you're getting too much, you can narrow down by date range too. Or if this is too little, you can expand the date range. Treatment motivation, transgender population, elderly population, prenatal. Oh, look at there. Predictors of workplace substance reuse. maybe, let me go back. I didn't think of reuse as a substitute for another one that we were talking about, sorry. So as you go, it's helpful to take notes. But let's do lifetime or longitudinal in the document title, and then let's just open it up to all dates. And we're still peer reviewed. There's only one. So this obviously doesn't want to be a document title. So you get the idea. You mess around with these. As you go, when you find an article, so for example, let's go back to that article. When you find an article, oh cool, there's predictions. 10-year perspective, longitudinal follow-up of 95 adolescents. Sounds like a good one. If you find an article that you think looks good, save the citation information. There's citation generators in all of these. And what I would recommend you do is in your note-taking or your citation manager, as you save an article, go in to the abstract. This is a really short abstract, or the first page or so, and find out what are one of the main points, and then write it down, or even grab a quote. Na, 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 na. Community epidemiology. Oh, cool. So you could say, even in your own language, young folks, anorexia, and substance abuse. Longitudinal study. So what happens is, as you start building your body of things that you're interested in, you can start to make sense and build a narrative of those, where you are going from A to B, and B is complete understanding, and so you're building that evidence with articles, and then as you see the ones that make sense to you that you want to include, then you can follow up further in those, and then you can read them in greater depth, and you can find quotes and build your narrative around like an annotated bibliography, where you're walking somebody through, well, here's a longitudinal study where they looked at young people. Maybe you want to do another age group. Here's another one where they talk about outcomes like employment trouble. And then as you go, you should be able to fill in all of these things as you go. But it may also help you understand what you're interested in, because you may not come out with the exact outcomes that you were looking at. You might find things that talk about it in a slightly different way. Like instead of abstinence, it might be a lessening or a better discipline of something rather than cutting cold turkey. Or instead of health in general, it might be improved outcomes or living slightly longer. So for example, I knew somebody who quit smoking after they'd smoked for decades. And now they're living longer and their lungs have cleared up and it's just fine. So there's different measurements and different criteria for all of these, and just going in and reading articles and finding them might be the key to helping you sort that out. But keep me in mind. I'm happy to help. I think there's a cool topic. I'll keep digging, and if I come up with anything brilliant, I will send it your way.